The sequel to the Hugo and Nebula nominated The Fifth Season has arrived, pitting a mother and daughter against nearly insurmountable odds of survival in a landscape scarred by geological disaster. The Obelisk Gate is the book I'm reviewing in this episode of SFF180. Hello everybody, Thomas here, and thank you as always for joining me. Now, if there is one takeaway from this book, it is that every apocalypse is personal. When you find yourself caught in a survival situation, it ultimately comes down to who you can trust and how best you can ensure you are still standing when all of the smoke and the ashes have cleared. Now, this has been a recurring theme in much post-apocalyptic fiction ever since SFF has been publishing the stuff. And although it shapes that template to its own ends, The Obelisk Gate is very much a post-apocalypse novel. Here, the line between science fiction and fantasy blurs until it is practically irrelevant. N.K. Jemisin's world of the stillness may be a bleak secondary world, or it could be our own world in some unimaginably distant, far future, geologically insane setting. Now, The Obelisk Gate has a tighter and more intimate focus than the fifth season, although both books, each in its own way, are centered on relationships. Now, while the fifth season spread its action out over decades in the life of its protagonist, the origine Essun, the sequel compresses its action into a much briefer time frame and divides its story between Essun and her lost daughter, Nassun. Now, Essun's search for her missing daughter, following the murder of her youngest son by her husband, launched the story of the fifth season and propelled us through a landscape fraught with endless perils. Now, Essun is an origine who possesses the ability to control and manipulate all of the seismic forces that endanger her homeland, the island continent of the Stillness, and all of its peoples. Now, she and other origines are viewed with mistrust and, frankly, outright bigotry by all of the people whose very survival depends upon their powers. For all that they are trained and kept under very harsh control by the Fulcrum and its guardians, whose methods, to be perfectly honest, cross the line into outright moral evil, it is an origin, Essun's teacher Alabaster, who triggers the cataclysm that begins the fifth season of the first book's title. The Obelisk Gate begins where the first novel leaves off. Essun and her traveling companions, among them the boy Hoa, find themselves at a community called Castrema, which is housed inside an enormous geode deep underground. Now, Hoa is a stone eater, a strange race of statue-like quasi-human beings with an affinity for the deep earth, who have the ability to pass through solid rock strata as if they were just fish swimming through the water. With the dying Alabaster also housed at Castrema, he is turning into stone himself. Essun discovers that she alone may possess the orgenetic skill to, if not altogether stave off, at least minimize the impact of Alabaster's breaking of the world. Otherwise, neither Castrema nor any other calm trying desperately to struggle for survival has a hope, because this is a fifth season that is probably going to last tens of thousands of years. Castrema's own food supply, especially fresh meat, is going to run out within the year, and its social cohesion is frankly already on a knife's edge due to the mixture of untrained origines and regular people within its population. Essun has some kind of connection to the obelisks, these bizarre crystalline artifacts from a dead civilization that are floating in the sky all around the land. And if she can somehow figure all of this out and gain some measure of command, then she might be able to save lives. But how can any people survive when nobody wants to let go of age-old fears and prejudices that refuse to let them see anybody who is different as being human at all? The book's second story thread follows Nassun, who's been taken far to the south by her father. Now, Nassun, whom we never really saw in the first book, quickly becomes every bit as interesting and compelling a character as Essun. Now, only 10 years old, she has to develop adult survival skills very quickly. She realizes that her father is so deranged in his hatred for origins. It's literally made him mentally imbalanced. I mean, after all, he did beat her kid brother to death. So she learns very quickly how to manipulate and to lead him, simply so that he won't murder her as well. But she is still a child herself, and unworldly, and thus unable to see how she herself is subject to very similar kinds of manipulation when an old acquaintance of her mother's pops up unexpectedly in the community they eventually settle in. So both Essun and Nassun find themselves on much different paths, but each facing the urgency of survival in fragile post-apocalyptic societies that could completely crumble around them at the slightest crack in the foundation. And where the 5th season dealt in some grandiose set pieces, this book favors interpersonal battles and a quieter intensity that is no less riveting dramatically. It's the kind of strong sequel that takes care not to simply repeat all of the storytelling beats of its predecessor, while at the same time remaining faithful to that book's overall tone and voice and themes. And at this rate, the Broken Earth trilogy as a whole is shaping up to be a seismic event in modern fantasy, a saga of love and hope and survival at all costs, with the power to topple mountains. And that is all I have time for on this episode of SFF180. Everybody, as always, thank you so much for joining me. Remember, the most important thing, these are reviews. You are not always going to agree with me, but if you enjoyed watching, please leave a like, share the video far and wide with all of your SFF reading friends, and above all, please subscribe if you haven't done so. That is how SFF180 grows as a channel. You can also support the channel at its storefront at TeePublic, where there are shirts and other merchandise. And until I see all of you awesome people next time, happy reading.